Adler Berryman Barry Seal was an American commercial airline pilot who became a major smuggler for the Medellin cartel. When Seal was convicted of smuggling charges, he became an informant for the DEA and testified in several major trials. He was unalived on the 19th of February 1986 by contract unalivers hired by the cartel. Barry Seal was born in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, the son of Mary Lou and Benjamin Curtis Seal, a candy wholesaler, on the 16th of July 1939. Seal began to fly as a teenager, earning a student pilot certificate at 16 and a private pilot certificate at 17. His flight instructor described him as a naturally gifted pilot. In 1962, Seal enlisted in the Louisiana Army National Guard for 6 years. 6 months on active duty, followed by 5.5 years of inactive duty. Seal's active duty began in July 1962. He was assigned to the 20th Special Forces Group and graduated from the United States Army Airborne School Selection and Training. His non-active duty was served in the 245th Engineer Battalion, where his MOS was radio telephone operator. In 1964, Seal joined TWA as a flight engineer and was soon promoted to first officer, then captain, flying a Boeing 707 on a regular Western Europe route. Seal's career with the TWA ended in July 1972 when he was arrested for involvement in a conspiracy to smuggle a shipment of plastic explosives to Mexico using a DC-4. The case was eventually dismissed in 1974 for prosecutorial misconduct, but in the meantime, TWA fired Seal, who had falsely taken medical leave to participate in the scheme. Seal admitted that he started smuggling small amounts of marijuana by air in early 1976. By 1978, he had expanded to flying significant amounts of drugs, pound for pound, a much more profitable enterprise than marijuana smuggling. Seal's operations received an important boost when he was arrested and jailed in Honduras on the return leg of a smuggling trip to Ecuador. Seal made important connections while in prison in Honduras, including Emily Camp, a fellow Louisiana pilot and a smuggler who became one of Seal's closest associates, and Ellis Mackenzie, a local Honduran smuggler. Also, after his release from prison, Seal met William Roger Reeves on a flight back to the US. It was Reeves who provided Seal with his first connection to the Medellin cartel. To expand his smuggling capacity, Seal also hired William Bottoms, his ex-brother-in-law, as a pilot. From 1980 on, Bottoms was the main pilot in Seal's smuggling enterprise, often flying with Camp while Seal oversaw planning and operations. In 1981, Seal began smuggling for the Medellin cartel. At its peak, he earned as much as $500,000 per flight transporting shipments from Colombia to the US. Seal's smuggling method was to use low-flying planes and airdrop packages in the remote areas of Louisiana. They were then picked up by Seal's ground team and transported to the Colombian distributors in Florida. By 1982, Seal was using over 12 aircraft in his smuggling operation. The number of planes and frequency of flights soon attracted the attention of Louisiana State Police and federal investigators. To avoid this unwanted attention, Seal moved his aircraft to Mena Intermountain Regional Airport in Mena, Arkansas, where he did maintenance and modifications to improve the plane's carrying capacity and avionics. Seal's activities in Mena later became the subject of rumour and controversy, but according to Seal's biographer, former FBI agent Del Hahn, Seal did not use Mena as a transshipment point. An extensive joint investigation by the FBI, Arkansas State Police, and the IRS revealed in 2020 that Barry Seal had used the Mena airport for smuggling activity from late 1980 until March 1984. By 1981, DEA agents in Florida were aware of Seal's smuggling activities. In April 1981, a DEA informant introduced Seal to an undercover DEA agent. After several months of contacts, the agent negotiated a deal with Seal to smuggle 1,200 pounds of methaqualone tablets into the US. The tablets were counterfeits made of chalk. The investigation into Seal was part of a major undercover operation called Operation Screamer, in which over 80 pilots were eventually indicted. 2 indictments were returned against Seal in March 1983. The first indictment charged Seal alone with 2 counts of conspiracy to distribute methaqualone. The second indictment charged Seal and 3 others with multiple counts of possession and distribution of methaqualone, phenobarbital, and mepridine. Seal surrendered to federal authorities at the end of April 1983 and attempted to make a deal, first with the Florida Task Force, then with the Baton Rouge Task Force. Both rejected any deals, even though Seal told them a little about his involvement with the Ochoa family. Without a deal, Seal was tried in February 1984 and after a month-long trial was convicted on all counts in the first indictment. Facing a heavy sentence and having been rejected by regional drug task forces in both Florida and Louisiana, Seal decided to try contacting the Vice President's Drug Task Force, a special program in the office of then Vice President George Bush. The office referred Seal to DEA headquarters, which assigned DEA agent Ernst Jacobson to debrief Seal and evaluate his potential as an informant. Jacobson was impressed with Seal's connection, especially the ones with the Ochoa family, and on the 28th of March, Seal signed a letter agreeing to serve as a DEA informant. Seal then pleaded guilty to the second indictment in Florida and was released with his sentence to depend on his performance as an informant. The Florida task force called for Seal to set up a purchase with the Ochoas and other cartel members, providing the basis for indictments in the US. Seal had previously dealt with the cartel through another associate, so they were unaware of his real name. Through his cartel contacts in Miami, Seal arranged a meeting using the name Ellis Mackenzie, the real name of another Seal associate. He flew down to Medellin for a meeting on the 8th of April, accompanied by a Miami-based cartel pilot who was unaware of Seal's role as an informant. Participants at the meeting included Pablo Escobar, Jorge Fabio Jr., and Juan David Ochoa. The Colombian government had recently conducted a major raid on the cartel's manufacturing facilities at a remote jungle location called Tranquilidad. Seal's claims about this meeting and its aftermath, as presented by the Reagan administration, were denied by the Sandinista government and would also come under serious media scrutiny. According to Seal, the traffickers were making arrangements to set up shipping and production facilities in Nicaragua, where they had struck a deal with the Sandinista government. These arrangements were not yet complete, so Seal's first shipment was to be a direct flight to the US. Originally planned for mid-April, the flight did not take place until the end of May. When it did, the overloaded plane crashed in the Columbia airfield on takeoff. The cartel provided a new plane, but it lacked the capacity for a direct flight to the US, so the cartel arranged a stopover in Nicaragua, earlier than the one planned at the airfield at Los Brailes near Managua. After refueling, Seal left Los Brailes without lights, and then when he came close to Managua, he was fired on by Nicaraguan military units. The plane was hit and Seal had to do an emergency landing at Sandino International Airport at Managua. The drugs were unloaded by the military and Seal and his co-pilot were taken to detention in downtown Managua, where they were released to the cartel's Nicaraguan contact, Federico Vaughan. This account was criticised by reporter Jonathan Quinty, then working as a staff reporter at Wall Street Journal, in a critique of the administration's claims in April 1987, who pointed out that the administration had earlier referred to Los Brailes as a military facility, while later acknowledging it to be a civilian field primarily used by crop dusters, as the field was listed at the time by the Department of Defense documentation. According to a federal grand jury indictment, Vaughan was an aide to Thomas Borg, Nicaraguan Minister of the Interior. This allegation was challenged by multiple reports and congressional inquiries following the subsequent leaking of the story. Quincy reported that Vaughan had worked in the Interior Ministry as a deputy manager of state-run import-export businesses and not as an aide to Borg. In 1988, the chair of the House Judiciary Subcommittee on Crime, William J. Hughes, released further information regarding Vaughan. The subcommittee affirmed that Escobar and his associates were operating from Nicaragua, but also cast doubt regarding Vaughan's ties. Hughes stated that subcommittee staff had called Vaughan's number, only to discover that the Managua residence had been rented since 1981 by a recently expelled member of the US Embassy staff. Hughes also raised several references to a Freddie Vaughan, particularly in July 1984, in Oliver North's diary, although it was not conclusively established if this referred to the same individual. In Managua, Seal met again with Pablo Escobar, who was setting up a lab for production. After a discussion about how to move the increased flow, Escobar decided to keep the first shipment in Nicaragua and have Seal return to the States to buy a larger plane. The plane Seal acquired was a C-123K, a large aircraft used primarily for military transport. Before returning to Nicaragua, the DEA arranged for CIA technicians to install hidden cameras inside the plane. Seal returned to Los Brailes airfield in Nicaragua on the 25th of June. The pickup went as planned this time, and the camera successfully photographed Seal and several individuals loading the plane, aided by Pablo Escobar, Gonzalo Rodriguez Gacha, and Federico Vaughn. On his return to the US, Seal landed at Homestead Air Force bases and the drugs were transferred to a Winnebago camper which Seal turned over to his Colombian contact. The Reagan administration would later claim that the men assisting Seal, Gatcha and Escobar were Sandinista soldiers, but none of the men were dressed in military uniforms. The drugs could not be distributed, and the immediate arrest of those handling the vehicle would suggest to the Colombians that Seal had betrayed them. So the DEA agents staged an accident with a camper, allowing the driver to escape. Unfortunately, the driver was arrested by local police and the circumstances of the seizure raised the suspicions to the cartel. Seal said that he made one more trip to Nicaragua on the 7th of July, bringing money to Escobar to pay the Nicaraguans for landing rights. Another shipment was also planned at this time, but under the instructions from the DEA, Seal told Escobar his landing site was under DEA surveillance and unsafe for transport to avoid the need to seize a second load. The DEA felt this would be impossible to explain away, and Seal returned to the US without cargo. The DEA plan was to keep Seal working with the cartel on other parts of the supply chain, such as moving the base to Nicaragua from Colombia and inspecting smuggling airfields in Mexico and the US. The ultimate hope was to arrest the cartel leaders in a jurisdiction where it would be easy to extract them. However, the Nicaragua undercover operation came to an end soon after Seal's return to a second trip when it was reported in the press. A leak regarding the operation came to light before Seal's second trip. On the 29th of June, General Paul F. Gorman, U.S. Military Commander, Southern Command, made a speech stating that the U.S. had evidence that elements of the Nicaraguan government were involved in drug smuggling, though Gorman did not mention Seal or the undercover flights. It was not clear whether Seal and his crew were informed of this before they returned to Nicaragua. A more detailed account of American efforts in Nicaragua appeared on the 17th of July in an article by reporter Edmund Jacoby, published on the front page of the Washington Times. Although not a complete account, it gave enough information to spell an end to Seal's work with the cartel and the DEA's hopes of capturing the cartel leaders outside of Colombia. Following the exposure of the Nicaraguan investigation, the DEA had to move quickly to arrest the cartel distributors in Miami. The DEA had been informed before the publication of the Jacoby article, so they were still able to have Seal set up a meeting with the chief cartel supervisor in Miami, Carlos Bustamante, and arrested him on the 17th of July along with other cartel employees. The evidence acquired from his arrest, plus the evidence gathered by Seal, provided the basis for the first drug trafficking indictment in the US against Escobar and the Ochoas. Despite the exposure, Seal was able to put together a second major undercover operation for the DEA later that year. This operation involved a long, complicated shipment from Bolivia, refueling in Colombia, refueling again in Texas, then delivering to Las Vegas. The DEA refused to let Seal leave the country due to the danger he was in, so Seal arranged for his ex-brother-in-law William Bottoms to make the flight. The flight, in January 1985, was successful and led to the arrests and convictions. In February, Seal also played a central role in an undercover operation against Norman Saunders. Saunders was videotaped paying a bribe to Seal in Miami and was also successfully prosecuted. While Seal had come to an agreement with the DEA and the Florida Drug Task Force in March 1984, he was still under active investigation by state and federal authorities in Baton Rouge, Louisiana and Little Rock, Arkansas. In October 1984, a grand jury in Louisiana was convened and began interviewing witnesses against Seal. Seal attempted to push back against the investigation by appearing in a television news series broadcast by WBRZ in Baton Rouge in November 1984. The documentary series, titled Uncle Sam Wants You, ran on 5 consecutive evenings. It included an interview where Seal denied that he was a smuggler and depicted Seal as harassed by the government. The state narcotics agents who were investigating Seal in Baton Rouge sued over the depiction in the series, but the lawsuit was dismissed. Soon after the broadcast, the heads of the Florida and Louisiana task force met to work out an agreement that would allow Seal to continue working with the Florida task force and testify as a witness at trial. They agreed to a sentence for Seal's Louisiana activities no greater than the sentence he received for his Florida smuggling, with both sentences to run concurrently. Seal was taken into federal custody in June 1985 and spent several months testifying in court. He was the primary witness in 3 trials: the trial of Saunders and the other officials in July, the trial of the cartel distributors in Miami in August, and the trial of the cartel distributors who had arranged the shipment of drugs from Bolivia to Las Vegas also in August. All 3 trials resulted in convictions for all defendants. Seal also made public appearance before the President's Commission on Organized Crime, recounting his experiences as a drug smuggler. Following his testimony in the Miami trials, Seal appeared in Florida court again over his second indictment in the Big Screamer operation. Although Seal had pleaded guilty with the support of his DEA supervisors, he was sentenced to 5 years of unsupervised probation. Following his testimony in Las Vegas, Seal spent another month in a witness protection center. In October 1985, he returned to court over the first indictment in Big Screamer, for which he had originally been sentenced to 10 years. After listening to summaries of Seal's successful work for the DEA, Judge Norman Roetiger sentenced Seal to time served, a little over 3 months in witness protection and 3 years probation. When Seal received only time served and probation, Louisiana state and federal drug investigators were faced with a dilemma. They anticipated Seal would serve substantial time in Florida and were now bound by the agreement Florida and Louisiana drug forces had made in December 1984. The Florida sentence meant no jail time for Seal in Louisiana, yet Seal was pleading guilty to buying 200 kilograms of drugs, already more serious than the Florida charges. Also, before the agreement was reached, the Louisiana Task Force investigation had been looking into Seal's involvement in smuggling thousands of kilograms of drugs. At Seal's sentencing hearing in January 1986, Judge Frank Palooza acknowledged that he was bound by the agreement but informed Seal and his lawyer of the dissatisfaction with Seal's failure to receive jail time in Florida, forcing Palooza to sentence Seal to probation on much more serious crimes in Louisiana. He warned Seal that he intended to set strict probation provisions and that if Seal violated these, the plea bargain would be revoked and Seal resentenced. Palooza took the occasion to say that people like Seal were the lowest, most despicable people I can think of. In imposing sentence, Palooza further stipulated that Seal could not carry a gun or hire armed bodyguards, as this would be possession or constructive possession of a firearm by a convicted felon. Seal's attorney, Louis Egglesby, told Palooza that ruling amounted to a death sentence for his client. Seal told friends that the judge made me a clay pigeon. The probation conditions prohibited Seal from leaving Baton Rouge without written permission from Judge Palooza, who ordered Seal to spend every night at a halfway house from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. for the first 6 months of his probation. Seal was assigned to the Salvation Army's Community Treatment Center in Baton Rouge. Seal was originally introduced to the Medellin cartel members as a pilot named Ellis McKenzie. Although the newspaper report and the arrest of the Miami distributors confirmed that the pilot was DEA, it was not until the cartel members received a copy of Seal's television documentary that they learned McKenzie was Seal. They put out a contract to kidnap or murder Seal. Max Malmstein, a high-level cartel distributor in Miami, later testified in court that he was shown the documentary a few days after it was broadcast and was told that the cartel wanted Seal either captured or killed. The price was $500,000 if Seal was killed, and $1 million if he was captured alive. Malmstein testified that he accepted the contract believing the refusal would mean death. He received a phone call from Fabio Ochoa and Escobar, who both thanked him for his help, and was given $100,000 for any cost he incurred. Before Malmstein had located Seal, however, he was arrested by federal task force in June 1985. He soon told the task force about the contract, and Seal was informed that the cartel was offering $500,000 for his death. On the evening of the 19th of February 1986, Seal was shot to death in the front of the Salvation Army Center 3 weeks into his probation. When Seal pulled into the center's lot and parked, a man got out the car behind the center's donation drop boxes and opened fire with a suppressed MAC-10 submachine gun. Seal was shot 6 times and died almost instantly. 6 Colombians were arrested in connection with the murder. 3 of them, Luis Carlos Quintero Cruz, Miguel Velez, and Bernardo Antonio Vasquez, were indicted on state charges for capital murder. A 4th man was indicted separately on lesser charges, and evidence of direct involvement was insufficient for 2, who were released and deported. In addition to the state charges against the killers, federal charges were filed against Fabio Ochoa, Pablo Escobar, and a 3rd cartel member, Rafael Cardona, for conspiring to violate Seal's civil rights by murdering him. Widespread publicity and general public outcry caused a delay of several months before Seal's murder trial began. It proved impossible to impanel sufficient jurors in Baton Rouge, so the venue was moved to Lake Charles. The trial began in April 1987. The most important witnesses were Max Malmstein and Luis Carlos Uniba Munero. Malmstein, who had told the DEA of the murder contract before his arrest in 1985, testified that Ochoa, Escobar, and Cardona had asked him to take the contract and provided him with money and weapons to do the job. He had seen Cardona testify the murder weapon in Malmstein's garage wall and bullets that matched the murder weapon were later extracted from the garage wall by FBI forensics. Malmstein also knew the defendant Velez. He testified that Velez was present when he was given the contract and that Velez later asked Malmstein to turn the contract over to him. Unibra Mura was a Colombian drug smuggler for the cartel. He testified that in January 1986 he was ordered by Jorge Ochoa to kill Seal. When Uribe Munera learned that he would possibly be killed afterward, he refused. He was then shot 5 times by cartel gunmen, but survived and eventually sought asylum in the US Embassy in Bogota. Uribe Munera was brought to the US, where he agreed to plead guilty to conspiracy to import and distribute drugs. There was also extensive eyewitnesses and forensic evidence against Quintero, Cruz, Velez and Vasquez. A witness testified Velez was the driver of the vehicle in the halfway house parking lot. Another eyewitness saw Quintero Cruz outside the car handing the MAC-10 to the car driver through the window after the murder. All 3 men's fingerprints were found in the vehicle. Vasquez was identified as the purchaser of the halfway house vehicle by the car agency salesman and paid for hotel rooms and rental cars using his name. All 3 were found guilty and sentenced to life without parole. In January 2023, Louisiana Governor John Bell Edwards denied Vasquez's request for clemency. Seal was married 3 times. His first marriage to Barbara Dodson lasted from 1963 to 1971. His second marriage to Lynn Ross lasted from 1971 to 1972. In 1973, he married Deborah Dubois. The marriage ended with his death in 1986. Seal had 6 children, 2 from his first wife, 1 from a relationship he had between marriages, and 3 more with Deborah. In 1988, the House of Judiciary Committee held a hearing that looked into how Seal's 1984 trip to Nicaragua was leaked to the press. Questioned about the identity of the source, DEA agent Ernest Jacobson replied, "I heard that the leak came from an aide in the White House." He stated that Iran-Contra figure Oliver North had attended 2 meetings about the sting operation and had the motivation to release the information. UPI reported, by linking the Sandinistas with drug traffic, aid to the rebels accused of human rights violations might seem more palatable. Subcommittee Chairman William J. Hughes strongly suggested that North was the source of the leak, but Representative Bill McCollum said, "We don't know who leaked this, no one has been able to tell us." Citing testimony of DEA Administrator John C. Lawn, the report of the Kerry Committee released in December 1988 pinned the leak on North, stating he decided to play politics with the issue. In an interview with Frontline, North said that he was told by his superiors on the National Security Council to brief Senator Paula Hawkins about the operation, but he denied leaking the report. Hawkins told Frontline that neither she or her staff leaked the information after the briefing. Jacoby later denied that North was the source of his story and attributed it to a deceased staff member for Representative Dan Daniel. Louisiana Attorney General William Gusty wrote to the United States Attorney General Edwin Messy criticizing the government's failure to protect Seal as a witness. At Gusty's request, Meese launched an investigation to determine whether or not attorneys in Louisiana, Miami, and Washington had mishandled the case, and to determine whether or not Seal should have been forced into protective custody. Government attorneys stated that Seal placed himself in danger by refusing to move his family and enter a witness protection program.